I thought I had already lost everything the day my marriage fell apart, but I was wrong. What I faced later was far more devastating: the possibility of losing my children. My name is Poppy. I am 34 years old, and 2 years ago, I found myself standing in a family courtroom, accused of being unfit to raise the very children I had carried, birthed, and nurtured with every ounce of my being. That courtroom became the battlefield of my life, and the enemy wasn't just my ex-husband, it was his entire family, a well-oiled machine of wealth, influence, and calculated cruelty. I wasn't fighting for money. I wasn't fighting for revenge. I was fighting for Jasper and Imogen, my son and daughter, my world. Jasper, 8 years old, with a heart so observant and brave that he often seemed older than his years. And Imogen, my 5-year-old, who still believed the world was good and that love was simple. They were my anchor in a storm that threatened to drown me, and every step I took in that courtroom was for them. Sebastian. My ex-husband was once the man I thought I'd grow old with. We had built a life together. Or at least I thought we had. He was successful, charming, and ambitious. But with his success came distance, then betrayal, and eventually a complete shattering of the vows we had made. The truth that ended us wasn't just his affair with Charlotte, his young assistant, but the realization that he valued appearances and wealth more than the family we had created together. And behind him stood his family. His mother Beatrice, who had never approved of me, who sharpened her disapproval into accusations that cut deeper than any blade. His sister Cordelia, who treated me like a mistake from the moment I first entered their world. And together they built a case to strip me of what mattered most: my children. They called me a gold digger. They painted me as a manipulator, a woman who cared more about money than her children. They twisted nights when I had worked double shifts at the hospital into evidence that I was neglectful. They paraded lies about my home, about my love, about my worthiness as a mother. Every word they spoke in that courtroom was a dagger aimed straight at my heart. And I had no army, no endless funds, just an overworked solicitor who believed in me and 2 children who loved me with a purity that money could never buy. But here's what they didn't count on. They didn't count on Jasper. Jasper, my little boy who had been watching everything, listening to everything, absorbing far more than I ever wanted him to. He had seen the cracks, the fights, the tears I tried to hide, and he had carried it quietly in his small shoulders until the day came when he could no longer stay silent. What he said in that courtroom didn't just make the judge pause, it changed everything. It shifted the balance of power in a room where I had been outnumbered, outspent, and nearly destroyed. And it reminded me of something I had forgotten in my fear: that sometimes courage comes from the smallest voices, the ones we least expect, the ones we try to shield from the ugliness of life. But before I tell you what Jasper revealed that day, I need to take you back to when I thought my marriage was still salvageable. Back to the mornings I put on my nursing scrubs and believed my husband was proud of me. Back to the nights when I convinced myself his long absences were just business, not betrayal. We had been married for 8 years when Sebastian's business took off. He became successful, wealthy, admired. And with that wealth came arrogance, late nights at the office, and weekends spent networking. I worked as a pediatric nurse, a job that didn't pay much but filled me with purpose. But to him, my work was trivial. He once told me after a grueling 12-hour shift, "You get to play with children all day. I'm out here building our future." It stung. Not because I didn't value his work, but because he diminished mine. And worse, he diminished me. The children noticed before I did. Jasper began to ask why Daddy was always angry. Imogen grew clingier, her little arms wrapping tighter around me, as though she sensed the ground beneath her was shifting. I tried to shield them. I smiled through the cracks, kept our routines, and prayed that whatever was broken could be fixed. But then one morning Sebastian ended it, just like that. He stood in our bedroom, unable to meet my eyes, and told me he wasn't happy, that he hadn't been happy for a long time. And then, with a kind of casual cruelty I'll never forget, he confessed to the affair. 8 months. 8 months of lies, of him coming home and tucking our children into bed while sneaking away to another life. That was the day the world collapsed. But even then, I didn't realize just how much further it could fall. The weeks after his confession were a blur of tears, paperwork, and whispered explanations to two children too young to understand why their father no longer lived at home. Jasper withdrew into silence, his eyes too knowing for his age, while Imogen asked every night if Daddy would be back to kiss her goodnight. I tried to keep the routine steady breakfast, at the same time bedtime stories every evening, but inside I was unraveling. Sebastian moved in with Charlotte within weeks. It was like we had been erased, replaced by the shiny new life he wanted to flaunt. And his family welcomed her with open arms. Beatrice even paraded Charlotte around at a charity gala, introducing her as though she were already part of the family. I wasn't just discarded, I was rewritten out of the story. At first I thought they'd let me keep what mattered most, Jasper and Imogen. Sebastian seemed indifferent about custody, too busy with his new life. But then Beatrice stepped in. She filed a petition claiming I was emotionally unstable and financially incapable of raising the children. She dredged up every painful part of my past, painting my miscarriages as evidence of weakness, my hospital shifts as neglect, my modest flat as unfit. I'll never forget the first time I walked into court. The walls loomed high, the air smelled of polished wood, and something sterile, and I felt small, so achingly small. Across the aisle sat Sebastian in his tailored suit, Charlotte by his side like a shadow, and Beatrice with her lips pressed tight, her eyes cold and victorious. They had a team of lawyers, polished and merciless. I had one solicitor, kind but overworked, flipping through a thin folder of evidence in my defense. The imbalance was glaring, and Beatrice knew it. She smirked at me like she had already won. The judge asked questions about my income, my schedule, my living arrangements. Every answer I gave felt like a nail in my own coffin. I wanted to scream, that Jasper's laughter filled every corner of our flat, that Imogen's drawings covered the fridge, that love made a home, not square footage. But the court wanted numbers, receipts, proof. They even brought witnesses. A neighbor testified that he had once heard Jasper crying late at night, twisting a single moment of heartbreak into evidence of neglect. Another claimed they'd seen me looking overwhelmed at the market, as though exhaustion was a crime. Each word chipped away at me until I barely recognized the woman sitting at that table. But what cut deepest was when Sebastian took the stand. He spoke about me with detachment, like I was a stranger. He praised my love for the children, then undermined it by suggesting I was too fragile, too emotional, too consumed by work to give them stability. And Charlotte sat there nodding along, her hand resting possessively on his knee. That night I went home and collapsed on the bathroom floor. Jasper found me there, tears soaking through my scrubs. He didn't say anything at first, he just sat down beside me, his small hand on mine. Then he whispered, "Don't cry, Mum. I'll tell them the truth." I shook my head, panicked. "No, Jasper, this isn't for you to carry. You're just a child." But he looked at me with eyes that were far too old. "I'm your child, and I know what really happens. They don't." I didn't realize then just how much he had seen, how much he had tucked away in that brave little heart of his. The hearings dragged on for weeks, each one more brutal than the last. I endured questions that cut into my soul, accusations that twisted love into negligence. And all the while, Jasper grew quieter, more observant, as if he were storing every injustice, every lie. Then came the day everything changed. It was late in the proceedings. Beatrice's lawyer had just finished painting me as a mother drowning in her own instability. The judge was about to adjourn when Jasper suddenly stood up. His small frame shook, but his voice rang clear. "Excuse me," he said. "I need to say something." The courtroom froze. My heart stopped. The judge blinked in surprise and gestured for him to continue. And in that moment, my little boy stepped into a storm meant for grown-ups, and he carried it with a strength that stunned us all. The room was so still you could hear the shuffle of papers stop the faint creak of the judge leaning forward. Jasper's voice trembled at first, but once he started, it grew stronger, like he'd been waiting for this moment all along. "My mom takes care of us," he said, his chin lifted. "She's the one who makes sure we eat, who helps me with my homework, who stays up when Imogen has nightmares. Dad doesn't do that anymore. He yells a lot. And when we're with him, he's not even there, he's with her." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Charlotte shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her face paling while Sebastian's jaw clenched tight. Beatrice's eyes darted between them, fury flashing like lightning. Jasper pressed on. I've seen him, at night, when he thinks we're asleep. He tells Charlotte that we're too much trouble, that he wishes he didn't have to take us. He said I was too much like Mum, and that he hated it. My breath caught tears burning at the corners of my eyes. I wanted to run to him to shield him from the weight of his own words, but I couldn't move. None of us could. The judge raised a hand. Mr. Monroe, he said, firmly addressing Sebastian, is there truth to what your son is saying? Sebastian stammered, his confident veneer cracking. He's a child, he doesn't understand. But Jasper didn't let him finish. I understand enough, he said loudly, his little fists balled at his sides. I know who loves me and Imogen. Mum does. Always. She never makes us feel unwanted. She never chooses someone else over us. Gasps echoed. My solicitor leaned toward me, whispering, this changes everything. For the first time, I saw the armor around Sebastian's family falter. Beatrice looked rattled, her composure slipping, and Charlotte ducked her head in shame. The judge cleared his throat, visibly moved. Thank you, Jasper. That was very brave. He gestured for him to sit, but the echo of my son's words lingered in the room like a bell that couldn't be unrung. I reached for him as he returned to my side, pulling him close, whispering, I'm so sorry you had to do that. He shook his head and whispered back, I wanted to. They needed to hear it. From that moment, the tone of the proceedings shifted. The judge began scrutinizing Sebastian's side more closely, asking sharper questions, demanding clearer evidence. The lies that once seemed polished now looked brittle, ready to shatter. But though hope sparked in me, so did guilt. Jasper had stepped into a war I never wanted him to fight. And yet he had fought it with more courage than I could have imagined. That night when we were finally home, I tucked him into bed. He looked at me with tired eyes and asked, Did I do good, Mum? I stroked his hair, my heart breaking and mending all at once. You did more than good, darling. You reminded me that love speaks louder than lies. But I also knew this wasn't over. Beatrice wasn't the type to surrender quietly. She would regroup, rebuild, and come back sharper. The battle wasn't finished, but for the first time I felt like we had a fighting chance. And it was my son, my brave, beautiful boy, who had lit that flame. The following week in court felt different. The same polished wood, the same heavy air, but the balance of power had shifted. Jasper's words still lingered in everyone's mind. I could see it in the way the judge watched Sebastian more closely, the way the lawyers on his side whispered urgently to each other, the way Beatrice sat stiffly, her lips pressed into a thin, furious line. They tried to recover. Sebastian's lawyer argued that Jasper was too young to understand that children were easily influenced by their mother. The implication was clear. They were accusing me of coaching him. The injustice of it burned inside me, but before I could respond, the judge intervened. Mr. Whitmore, the judge, said, his tone sharp, It takes a great deal of courage for a child to speak in a setting like this. I saw no indication of coaching. What I did see was honesty. The words landed like stones in the quiet room. For the first time, I saw Sebastian falter. His polished mask slipped, his eyes flickering with something like fear. Beatrice leaned toward him, whispering furiously, but her son didn't meet her gaze. For all her control, for all her schemes, she couldn't shield him from the truth his own child had spoken aloud. As the proceedings went on, more cracks appeared. Their evidence of my unfitness began to unravel. My neighbors came forward with letters describing the countless times I had helped them, cared for their children, supported the community. Colleagues testified to my dedication as a nurse. Even Jasper's teacher wrote a statement about his love for me and the stability I gave him. It wasn't wealth, it wasn't influence, it was truth. And truth, piece by piece, was dismantling their carefully built lies. But Beatrice wasn't done. On the final day of testimony, she stood herself. Dressed immaculately, her pearls glinting under the harsh lights, she delivered a speech about family legacy, about what's best for the children, about how my emotional fragility endangered them. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her. They flicked toward me with disdain toward Jasper, with fury toward the judge, with desperation. For all her poise, she was grasping. When she sat down, the room felt colder. I knew she still believed money and power would sway the decision. And maybe she was right. For a moment, doubt clawed at me. Then Jasper reached for my hand. His small fingers wrapped around mine, grounding me. I looked at him and remembered the strength he had shown, the truth he had spoken. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't list numbers or defend against every accusation. I spoke from the place they couldn't touch. I am not perfect, I said, my voice breaking but clear. But love doesn't require perfection. It requires presence. And I have been present every day of my children's lives. I have held them through their fevers, cheered them in their triumphs, comforted them in their fears. I don't have wealth or influence, but I have love. And love is what makes a home. My words hung in the air. The judge nodded slowly, and in that small gesture I felt a flicker of hope. As we left the courtroom that day, Beatrice brushed past me, her perfume sharp, her whisper sharper. This isn't finished. And maybe it wasn't. But for the first time, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like a mother standing tall no matter the storm. Because I wasn't alone. I had Jasper. I had Imogen. And together our love was louder than her hate. The final hearing arrived on a gray morning, the kind where the sky felt heavy enough to collapse. I woke before dawn, staring at the ceiling, my chest tight with dread. This day would decide everything, whether Jasper and Imogen stayed with me, or whether they would be swallowed into the cold world Beatrice controlled. I dressed carefully, not in anything expensive or flashy, but in something that felt true. A simple blouse Jasper had once said made me look like the mum in his drawings. I wanted the judge to see me as I was, not polished, not perfect, but real. When we entered the courtroom, the air vibrated with tension. Sebastian sat rigid beside Charlotte, who looked paler than I'd ever seen her. Beatrice sat like a queen awaiting her coronation. Chin-high lips curved in a faint smile of superiority. But behind her eyes I caught something else. Something I hadn't seen before. Fear. The judge began by summarizing the case. His words were measured, deliberate, but every sentence felt like a stone pressing down on my chest. He spoke of accusations, evidence, testimony, and then he paused. This case is not about wealth, he said firmly, looking directly at Beatrice. It is not about influence. It is about the best interests of the children. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. He continued. I have listened to witnesses, reviewed documents, and most importantly, heard the voice of an 8-year-old boy who demonstrated remarkable honesty and courage. His words reflected not only his own experience, but also the stability and love he receives from his mother. Tears welled in my eyes. Jasper squeezed my hand, his small palm warm and steady. The judge turned to Sebastian. It is clear that while you provide financial means, you have neglected the emotional needs of your children. Your priorities lie elsewhere. Custody will remain with their mother. The gavel struck. The sound was final, echoing like thunder. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Relief surged through me, mingled with exhaustion so deep it made my knees weak. I pulled Jasper and Imogen close, their little bodies clinging to me, their faces buried in my arms. We were together. We were safe. Beatrice stood slowly, her mask cracking at last. This is a mistake, she hissed, her voice low but venomous. You'll regret this. I met her eyes, no longer afraid. No, I whispered back. The only regret here is yours. Sebastian avoided my gaze, his shoulders slumped, his hand limp in Charlotte's. For the first time, he looked like the one who had lost everything. Outside, the gray clouds parted just slightly, a thin beam of light breaking through. Jasper tilted his face toward it, smiling faintly. See, Mum? We told the truth, and it worked. I hugged him tighter, my heart swelling with pride and sorrow all at once. Yes, darling, the truth always finds a way. That night at home, I tucked them both into bed. Imogen asked softly, Are we staying here forever? I kissed her forehead. Forever, I promised. When I closed their door, I leaned against it, the weight of months of fear finally lifting. We had survived the storm. And though scars remained, love had anchored us through every wave. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest power. Sometimes the bravery of a child reminds the world that truth can stand against even the darkest lies. And that's what Jasper taught me, that love spoken honestly is stronger than any empire built on control. If this story touched you, please like this video, Share it with someone who needs hope and subscribe for more true stories of resilience and love. And tell me in the comments, have you ever seen truth win against lies? I'd love to hear your story too.